Hello and welcome to Systems and Cloud Administration. Here we are in Lab 6 and we will install and configure a virtual private network server to restrict access to our cloud virtual machine instances to VPN only. So in this lab we will configure a secure VPN server, and we will make a secure point-to-point connection from our client to the VPN server, and we will limit access to our instances to VPN only. And that's very useful in situations where you have lots of virtual machines and you want to revoke access to a certain user, so you don't need to go through um, tens or hundreds of virtual machine instances and revoke the access for that particular user on each instance. So all we need to do is just go to the VPN server and revoke the access to that particular user, so that way they will not be able to access any of your resources on the cloud. All right, so for this lab we will need to have access to a cloud provider. So in my case, I will be using AWS. You could use Microsoft Azure if you want, or any other provider. You need to create SSH keys and upload your public key to the cloud provider. That's not something I'm gonna do here. So yeah, that's something we have done in the previous labs. So make sure you check that. And also we need to create a VM instance running CentOS 7. Okay, so let's get started. So the first step, I will go to the cloud provider, and the service that I have on AWS is the EC2. So I will launch a new instance and select the image. So I'll use CentOS 7, search for it, and then I should pick the one provided by CentOS.org. Okay, CentOS 7 x86-64, select. Okay, and then I will do continue. I will pick the cheapest one, probably T3.nano. This is just an example, but in reality, or in real world, you will just pick something that has enough memory and can handle lots of traffics to that instance. Okay, so two vCPUs and half a gig of memory should be enough for this demo. Okay, so one thing you need to pay attention to is the network traffic. Okay, these things will cost you probably money because you're sending traffics into that instance. So these things, you need to review the pricing page on your cloud provider before um, picking an instance, right? So I'm gonna do next, configure instance details. Okay, just pick the default ones. I don't need storage. Okay, tags, I only have one virtual machine, but it will be useful if you have lots of VMs and you want to tag them so you can track them. Okay, security groups, so this is something we will be using. So we want to restrict the access from to any to specific IPs. Okay, if you put 00, allow IP address to access your instances, okay, from anywhere. Okay, so we'll probably put a custom. Okay, we'll put a custom IP address. Okay, and that IP address will be the IP address of if you create a new VM. We want to restrict the access to only the VPN, so we need to put the public IP address for the VPN, not for this instance. Okay, so probably need to protect this instance somewhere, somehow, using a specific IP address of your choice. Okay, I'll leave this one just as is, and um, then I probably, if I could see the source ID needs to be a CIDR block. Okay, anywhere. So anywhere access to SSH. I would also need to enable UDP port for the um, cloud, for the virtual private server for the VPN, and that's 1194. Okay, so make sure you enable that. So you select all UDP and the type is UDP, and then or sorry, you should pick a specific custom UDP rule. So UDP, and then pick the IP address for that. Okay, all right, and then just select anywhere. All right, and then you add this rule. So we have TCP 2020, 22 for the SSH, and UDP 1194 for the VPN server. We don't need port 80. This is not a web server. This is a VPN server. Alright, so next I go to review and launch instance. Okay, these are the details that I selected for my instance. Okay, so this is what we see, and then um, instance details. Okay, so these are the instance details, okay, that we selected. So I will go ahead and select launch this instance. Okay, so now it's time to upload your public key, okay, your SSH key, so you can access this one. Okay, so so choose an existing key pair, select a key pair, no key pair found, so you need to go and upload one. Create a new key pair by selecting the create a new key pair option above. Okay, so create a new key pair. Okay, give it a name. So I'm gonna call it AWS key. Okay, so this way you will need to download the private key. So the public key will be uploaded into this instance by AWS EC2, and I have only to download the private key. Okay, so this is my private key. So do download. Okay, save it. Right, and then on your client machine you need to move that key into the into a place that you can go into. Okay, so usually that's the home directory dot ssh, right? So you can refer to the previous labs and how to do that. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and click launch instance using that public key that was created for me. So this will launch the instance in AWS. Alright, so our instance has been created, okay, and now it's being launched. So just give it a few seconds, and then you're good to use it. Okay, so um, you can go to the view instances. Okay, and now you can see your instance is running. Okay, but the status of checks is still initializing. All right, so these are the information that we need to access the instance. So they will give you a public DNS that you could use to refer this instance, right? And then you will get a public IP address, right, to access this instance, right? I prefer to use the public IP address to do the SSH, so I copied that, and now I need to access it in my from my SSH client from the terminal or console. Alright, so let's see how we can access it. Alright, so to access our virtual machine instance through SSH, we do SSH minus I, and then the path to the key that I just downloaded. So AWS, that's the private key that I downloaded from AWS, and then I put the username. So the default username on EC2 for CentOS is CentOS, and then add the IP address, right? Okay, so permission denied. So this is an issue with the file permission on the um, private key. So private key shouldn't be to open. Okay, so we need to change the permission for the private key. So change mode from 644 to just 600, so others shouldn't see it and groups shouldn't also see it. So 600, and then give it the file, so that just SSH is rejecting uh, the two permissive permissions that were placed on this file. Okay, so change that, and then it should work. So let's see. All right, so now I am on the virtual machine. So let's start installing our VPN server, our Open VPN instance server on this CentOS instance. So I'm gonna run the command probably fast. So feel free to pause the video or rewind as I run these commands. So let's get started. So the first step is to install OpenVPN. So I'm going to install OpenVPN sudo yum -y install EPL release. Okay, and the next step is to install um, easy RSA and firewall D. So I'm going to do sudo yum -y install easy RSA, um, and then I will also install firewall D. Okay, so I put the link for these tutorials. All the commands are below in the description, so you may need to refer to that. Okay, so once we install Easy RSA, it's a public key infrastructure management tool that we need to create our keys and certificate authorities to handle our VPN server. Okay, and the SSL key pairs to secure our VPN connection. So once that is installed, I need to enable firewall D. So this is just the internal firewall for our instance. So once enabled, so I need to do in mask and then enable, and then I will start the firewall daemon. Okay, so now we installed these things. We need to install OpenVPN. So sudo yum -y install OpenVPN. Okay, so now we installed all the tools. We installed all the tools that we need for our VPN server. Okay, so next step is to create and generate the keys and certificates. Right. So before I talk about generating the keys and certificates for OpenVPN, I just want to go briefly review the public key cryptography and public key infrastructure. Okay. So in public key cryptography, we know this is asymmetric encryption. So we're using two keys. Okay. So we use the public key for encryption and the private key for decryption. Okay, so we have two keys that are independent but they are associated with each others. So in this scenario, if we have Bob who wants to send a message to Alice, so Bob needs to obtain Alice's public key, and then he will encrypt the message. So hello Alice, this is a plain text message was encrypted using Alice's public key. So Alice will need to publish her public key to the public. Okay, so there is no secrecy here. She just could release her public key, and then anyone who wants to send a message to her, all he or she needs to do is just encrypt that message using her public key. Okay, but no one can decrypt the message without her private key, and her private key must be private to her. Okay, so she will receive the message encrypted. This is the ciphertext, and then she will decrypt the message using her own private key, and then she will get the plain text back. Okay, so one problem with this public key cryptography is Alice's public key. Okay, so so how can we make sure that this is Alice's public key, not someone else's public key? Okay, so we want to make sure that this is actually her own public key. Okay, So this is why we have things like certificate authorities and public key infrastructure. Okay, so public key infrastructure is basically a set of rules or framework to create, manage, store, distribute, and revoke digital certificates. Okay, and digital certificate is just a simple document issued by someone we trust, okay, to prove the ownership of a public key. Okay, someone who would prove that this is the owner of this public key. Okay, and this is the someone who we usually trust is called a certificate authority. Okay, just as an entity or an organization, okay, that issues digital certificates and prove that this is the public key of that particular individual. Okay, so in our Open VPN scenario, we are not going to use, this is just a simple PKI infrastructure that we will be configuring and setting up. So we will use our own simple public key infrastructure implementation with our own certificate authority. So CA doesn't have to be a certificate, can be a server that we trust. Okay, so we'll use that as the server to issue these digital certificates that prove the identity of our server. Okay, it proves the public key of our server to clients that connect to our VPN. Okay, so one last thing I want to mention here is it's not always the public key is used for encryption. Sometimes we encrypt things with the private key, and that's usually helpful in proving that this message was sent by that individual. Okay, so if I encrypt the message using my own private key and then you can decrypt it using my public key, that means to you that this message was really sent by me. Okay, and that's usually done by the certificate authorities. um, they sign the messages using their private key, and then we can decrypt the message using their public key to make sure that this message is coming from that CA. Okay, so that's it for public key infrastructure. We will use an implementation to set up public key infrastructure for our VPN server, and that's usually done through an open source implementation called Open SSL. Okay, so the next step is to create and generate the keys and certificates. So we need to set up our public key infrastructure, which consists of the certificate, okay, also known as the public key, and a private key for the server. Okay, and we need also to set up the keys for each client that connects to the VPN. So we need the master certificate authority. Um, so and we also need a key which is used to sign each of the server and client certificates. So OpenVPN uses a bidirectional authentication model based on certificates. So each one should have a certificate. So the client must authenticate the server certificate, and the server must authenticate the client certificate before we can establish a mutual trust. Okay, so it's very important to be aware of the fact that losing the CA key destroys the whole security of your public key infrastructure. All right, so to get started, we need to set up the certificate authority. So we're in step 3 of the tutorial. So to set that up, I'm gonna create everything in my home directory, and then I will move things into a special directory, right? So let's get started. All right, so first step is to create the directories. So make directory CA, and then go to CA directory, and then we need to initialize our public key infrastructure, okay, in this CA directory. So sudo user share easy RSA, and then the version is 3, and then easy RSA init PKI. Okay, so we did initialize the certificate authorities. Okay, so the next step is to um, build a root certificate with an encrypted CA key. Okay, so we need to run this command. Okay, so now we have our private keys stored in a directory under this place. So we need to specify the passphrase. So just pick a passphrase that you can um, remember. Okay, so it's very important that you select something secure and something you can refer to. Okay, so failed, so probably confirm it. Okay, so select a common name for your host. um, so you need to select um, the the name, okay, the common name for your certificate, and that can be your user, that can be your host. Just pick any common name. Usually in production environment you would pick something like the fully qualified domain name of your host. Okay, that's something typically find in your um, cloud provider dashboard. If they give you something like a domain name for your instance that you can pick, okay, or any fully qualified domain name of your choice that you set up on that instance. Okay, so for this example I'm just gonna pick something simple just for the purpose of this tutorial. So I'm gonna do my VPN, okay, as the name of the common name for this certificate authority. Okay, so the next is we need to generate the certificate revocation list. This is when we want to revoke users, revoke access to our certificates or VPN server. So pick the you have to type the passphrase that you selected, okay, in order to generate it. So now we have generated the certificate revocation list. Okay, so next we need to set up the server. So now done with the CA. So if I go back, um, if I go back and then so that's for the CA certificate authority. Next is to create our server, okay, keys. So set up the PKI, the public key infrastructure for the server. And to do that we need to do create a directory for that server. So make directory server and then go to that directory. Okay, so we need to initialize the PKI infrastructure. So initialize it. So now it's initialized. So next is we need to generate the server key pair and request for that server. Okay, so this is the command. We don't need to specify a passphrase for or we don't need to encrypt our private key just for this purpose, but probably in production environments very important um, to encrypt your private keys. Okay, so that way if anyone can obtain them in this setup, anyone will be able to access um, your VPN. Okay, okay, so pick a common name, and again a common name can be anything for your server. Okay, so I'm gonna pick the default one. So the default one is my dash VPN server key. So hit enter. So now right now the server PKI is set up. Okay, next we need to set up our client. So you need to go to the create a directory for the client. So I'm gonna name it client 1. Okay, and then I go to that directory client 1 and then run initialize the PKI infrastructure, okay, with sudo. So sudo. Okay, so now it's initialized. Next is we need to generate the client key pair. Okay, so easy RSA generate request, so gen dash rec, and then the name of the client key. Okay, so client 01 key, and then it's not encrypted. Okay, so select the default name for the as the common name. Okay, and then hit enter. Okay, so that's for generating the required keys. Next is we need to generate the keys and signing the request. Okay, so we need to sign these requests by the certificate authority. So now we need to import the certificates, the digital certificates, to the CA. Okay, and the CA will sign and return a valid certificate. Alright, so we'll first import the server and then we'll import the client. Okay, so we'll go to the CA directory for the certificate authorities, and then I need to import the server certificates and then give it a name. Okay, so I'm just gonna go ahead and copy and paste this command. Okay, run it, and now the request has been successfully imported with a short name of VPN-server01. Okay, that's just the short name for this certificate request. Alright, so next is to do the same for the client. Okay, so I'm gonna copy and paste this import request command. So now we did the same for the client, and we have the short name client1 for the client. Okay, so now it's optional to review the certificates. So if you want to review the certificates, easy RSA has a command called show request. Okay, so it's similar to the command that we run, but it says show request. Okay, so show request, if you want to see the server requests, then it will tell you the date when it was created. It will show the common name that we picked previously. Okay, and will show any additional attributes for that. Okay, it tells you where the request file is located and so on. Alright, so now we verified you probably do the same for the client. Alright, so the client request, so client 01 is for the client, so VPN dash client dash 01. Okay, probably not the actual name. Okay, let me see. So share request, not VPN, client dash 01. Okay, so this is the request for the client, and this is the common name that we picked for the client. Alright, so now we wanna we did the same for the client, so we verified the request. Next is we wanna sign each request file as one of the types server or clients. Right, so we wanna indicate whether it's a client request or server request for our certificate authorities. Okay, so make sure you are in the CA directory and then run this command to sign the server request. Right, so let's do that. Okay, so now just getting some confirmation. If you want to confirm um, the type just the word yes. So request subject to be signed as a server certificate for 3,650 days. Okay, and then afterward it will expire. Okay, subject equals common name, my VPN server key. If you want to sign it, type yes, and then hit enter. Okay, now it will ask you to enter the passphrase for this CA key, so for your certificate authority. So make sure you type the one that you selected previously. And now we have successfully created the certificate, and the certificate is saved under CA PKI issued, and you'll find all the issued certificates bar your certificate authority. Okay, so we do the same thing with the client. So sign the request for the client, um, and then confirm. Okay, type the passphrase for your certificate authority key, and now we have signed the request. So now we have two certificates under our CAPKI issued, and the second one now is for the client. All right, so the next step is we need to generate a defi element parameters on the server. um, so we go to the server directory, and then we run this command. Okay, so easyrsa sudo, and then um, we give it the general dh command to generate the defi elements um, keys, okay, parameters. So you hit enter. This is gonna take a few minutes probably to complete. Okay, so now it's complete. So we're done with generating the keys and signing the certificates. Next step is to set up and configure OpenVPN. Okay. All right. So now we need to configure our OpenVPN server. So we need to create a special directory to store the generated keys for OpenVPN. So make a new directory at etc OpenVPN keys, right? And then we want to copy all the certificates, the keys that we need into that directory. All right, so I'm gonna copy and paste these commands. So copy the CA certificates, and then copy um, the defi elements parameters. Okay, and then we'll copy the server uh, uh, keys. Okay, so the server key, and then we'll copy the client certificate. All right, and then we need to copy the example config file that comes with OpenVPN. In this lab, I'm using OpenVPN 2.4.6. I believe most versions come with the sample config files, so we'll use that as a starter instead of typing everything. Okay, so copy and paste that command. So this will copy the server.conf file. This comes with OpenVPN, and I'll copy that one into etc OpenVPN. Alright, so we will copy that into etc OpenVPN, and I will be server.conf. And next is we need to open that um, um, config file. So open that in your text editor. Okay, so sudo I don't have nano installed yet, so I'm gonna do it really quick. uh, Install nano. You could use vim if you're comfortable with vim, but that's if you don't have nano, then you need to install nano. You probably find it much easier to work with compared to vim. Alright, so this is what install nano, so you can open that file in nano. Okay, so what you need to change is basically you need to tell it where the CA keys, the certificate for the server, and the private key for the server, and the defi element parameters. Okay, so you need to specify all these required keys in this config file. We also need to define our DNS, the log file that we log for, and the user who owns um, or who is going to run OpenVPN process. Alright, so port, this is the default port. We'll keep that one as is. We're gonna use our UDP to establish the connection to our OpenVPN server. Okay, scroll down and then scroll down. Alright, so this is CA, it says CA cert, okay? But remember we copied things into a directory called keys, right? So I'm gonna put keys relative to this file, so keys CA cert, and then keys for the server certificate, we called it VPN dash server dash 01. Okay, so VPN dash server dash 01.crt, and then for the key we did keys, and then I'm gonna do this command, so probably copy and paste to avoid any typos. So copy and paste this. Okay, and then the define elements for the DH, we have the file stores under keys. So for this one, the actual name of the file is under keys and it's called dh.pim. Right, so topology subnet, keep that one as is the topology, so we need to uncomment that, so or remove the semicolon. We need to set up the DNS, so I need to find the statements that says push redirect gateway. Okay, so we need to scroll down. Yep, right here. So we need to configure the DNS. So this is the DNS settings. So we're gonna use Cloudflare. I'm going to use Cloudflare. If you don't want to use that, you could use Google. Google starts with 888. So I'm gonna use Cloudflare's one. So 111, and then the secondary DNS server will be 1001. Right? So that will set up this VPN. We need to set finally the logs. So logs, probably slow and nano. I'm not quite familiar with it, so I would use Vim and search for things. So bear with me. So it's right here. So log. So log, we need to change the path where to save the log file. So usually logs are saved under var log. Okay, if you don't specify that, we'll go to the system log file. It's going to be a huge file to look at. So that's why it's always a good idea to store things um, in a special file for each process or daemon that's running in your system. So that's for the log append. So this will create the log, this will append things to the log. Last is to find the user and group. So user and group, we're gonna uncomment nobody. So where is user and group? Right here. So remove the semicolon, keep it as nobody, and then you need to do Control X to save, to Control O to write and confirm, and then Control X to exit. Okay, so now we configured the configuration file with all the needed keys and values. Okay, so lastly we need to add a shared secret key just to harden the security of our VPN server. So we need to create the shared secret key using OpenVPN. So we need to do sudo open VPN and then minus minus gen key. So this open VPN is the daemon process running in the background. So we'll generate a key and we'll save it under our keys directory for TLS Script key. So this is the actual name of that key. So hit enter. So now the key is it's been generated. So we need to go back to our config file. So open that in your um, text editor, which shows you could use nano. I'm gonna use vim this time, so I can look up the key. So try to find TLS dash auth. Okay, so it's right here. So we need to replace this line that says TLS dash auth ta dot key 0. We want to specify the file that we put. So change this from TLS auth into TLS script. Okay. Oh, so probably forgot to open it with sudo, so I can write into that file. Okay, so change this to TLS script. Okay, or you just could copy and paste the whole thing here. Okay, so copy and paste this line. So the bound sign is just for comment. So and then save it. Okay, so now that is saved, right? So next step is we need to set up routing with IP tables, and the reason we want to set up routings for our VPN server is we want to basically tunnel all the traffics from our that are connected, client machines that are connected to our VPN server over our Open VPN server. Okay, so any connection the client makes, whether it's HTTP connection or SSH or FTP, any kind of connection, we want to tunnel it to our Open VPN. If you don't do that, then basically the client will not be able to connect to any other resources. Okay, so only make a connection one to one, so the client to the VPN server, but your client will not be able to communicate with the outside network. So that's why we need to add firewall rules and routing configuration. So let's see that. So if you remember, we have installed firewall D, the daemon for our firewall, and we started it, I believe. So we need just to find the active zone for that firewall. Okay, so it doesn't show any active zone, so it returns nothing. So what we need to do is we need to find the name of the interface and then set the name of the active zone for our firewall, right? So if you do IP address and then hit enter, you probably is going to see the name of your interface, network interface. Okay, so this is not the actual network interface that we're connected to. This is the local. So the actual name of the interface in this case is ANS5, right? So this is the one that has an IP address, and this is the main interface for our network. Alright, so we need to copy and paste this command, but instead of eth0, the name in my case is ans5. So probably in your case it's going to be something else. So make sure that you take note of that. Alright, so I'm gonna just copy and paste this one without the eth0 because that's not my interface. And then I'm gonna put the name of this interface at the end of this command. Okay, so this will change the name of the interface. So if I run the previous command again, sudo firewall command get active zones, it should sorry, I need to reload the firewall settings. So if you not reload it, these things will not take effect. Okay, so so if I reload it and then restart the firewall daemon, the process. Okay, and then if I run this one again, If I get the active zone, it shows the public interface is 5. That's my network interface. Okay, so I need to reload and then restart the firewall. Right, so now we need to add these rules for our for our firewall daemon to allow the connection to. Okay, so there is one specific thing for add a server for OpenVPN. So we're gonna add this one as a service, the default ports, or if you're not so sure about the ports, you can use the um, this command, okay, to add these things permanently, right? So I don't believe you need to run all of these three commands. You just need to pick one. Um, so uh, so this is how you will add your um, this role to your firewall daemon. Okay, so it will allow UDP on this port, so UDP on this 1194 for our VPN server. So similarly, you need to reload and restart if you uh, want to see these things taking effect. So reload and then restart, or you can wait for all the changes you make and then reload and restart at the end. Alright, so we need to enable IP masquerade. So if you're not familiar with masquerade, it's just a mechanism that allows one-to-many connection over the network. So if you are connecting this machine, your client machine, into this VPN server, and you want to access the internet through that VPN server, so that will allow your client to reach many other machines through the VPN server. So we need to enable that. Once it's enabled, you need to reload and then um, restart. So reload the config files and then restart um, the firewall daemon. Alright, so next we need to forward or routing to the OpenVPN subnet. So we need to get the route to the DNS resolver that we chose in the previous steps, that the Cloudflare's, in my case, resolver. So we also need to use the VPN subnet that OpenVPN draws client addresses from, and that subnet is defined in our config file. Alright, so if I go and open this command, so it's just to serve um, an interface variable. So this is just a bash variable that we are gonna use in the next command. Okay, so this commands will allows us to basically allow routing. Okay, so it's CMD permanent direct pass through IP version 4 minus T NAT minus A post post routing. Minus S is the IP address of our subnet that we define in server.conf. So if I open this one, I'm not gonna edit it, so I'm not gonna do sudo, and then look for the subnet. Uh, okay, so it's defined right here. Okay, so you see server 10800. Okay, so that's our subnet. VPN subnet for our OpenVPN to draw addresses from this subnet. Okay, so whenever you connect to, OpenVPN will draw an address for your client from that subnet. So copy this long command and then paste it here. So we'll reference the interface variable. This is a a bash, sorry, a bash variable that we declared in the previous step here. Okay, so hit enter. Okay, so that way this thing is done. We need to reload the config so they take effects, and we also need to enable IP forwarding in our etc um, syscontrol config file. Okay, so we need to enable IP forwarding. So we go ahead and open this one in your text editor. Um, so I'm gonna open it with nano. So copy. Okay, and then add the following line at the top of the file. So at the top of the file, we'll add this rule. It says net dot ip version 4 dot ip underscore forward equals 1, which means enabled. So not this is not vim, so control X and then hit yes. Okay, so finally we need to restart our network service. Okay, so probably forgot to restart our VPN. So system control restart, so our firewall D, okay, and then restart your network service. Alright, so now our network servers is restarted, and next is we need to start Open VPN and configure our clients. So probably the last thing you need to do on the server is to start OpenVPN daemon, the background process automatically at boot. So you do that with system control. So if I paste this command, so system control minus F enable the OpenVPN at server.service to reboot at runtime. Sorry, to start at reboot. So and then we need to start it. So okay, so now we need to set up the client. So we need to have an OpenVPN client to connect to our OpenVPN server, and that's usually done by downloading a software on your client machine. So if you're using Windows, there is OpenVPN GUI. Perhaps there are many options that I'm not familiar with. On Mac OS, there is Tunnel Blick. So if you're on Mac, you can download that. If you're on Windows, you could download the OpenVPN GUI. So I believe they have an installer. If you go to releases, usually, or you could just follow the instructions in the README file. For Tunnel Blick, it's also another open source OpenVPN client. So you could download that binary um, and install it on your machine. So what we need is we need to create a profile file for each client. So if you're using your Windows machine, you need to create a client file for your Windows machine. If it's for Mac, you need to create another one for Mac, another one for your Android if you want, but you also need to make the changes to the server. So remember, in our server CA keys and certificates that we generated, we assume we only have one client. So if you want to do or support multiple clients, you need to add them um, as well manually, or write your script to automate this process. Alright, so this is a starter file that we need. So I'm gonna create this file. This is not going to be on the server. So this is something that is going to be on the client. So I'm gonna open a new tab on my terminal. And again, this is not on SSH. This is on my own machine. So what I need is I need to create a file. So I don't believe I have nano. Oh, I have nano, turns out. Okay, so client, let's call it client1.ovpn. So create a directory anywhere on your computer. Okay, you can save it in desktop anywhere you want with the extension OVPN. So create that and then paste this whole content, and we will go and insert these values that we need. First thing is remote. So remote should be the public IP address of your um, VPN server. So that's done through the console. So if I go to the console, I find the public IP address of my instance. So I go ahead and paste that one here. All right. So keys. Now I need to create the keys. So to create the keys, sorry, to paste the keys that we generated. So this is the key, actually is the client key. So the client key is what we put in the server. So if I go to the server and find the content of that key, so I do cat to client, um, was it in client 01? So client 01 and then PKI and then private. So probably need to use so let me just do it here. So I need to cat this whole content. Probably created that with sudo, that's why it's not letting me do this. So let me cat it. So sudo cat this whole key, and you need to copy and paste the whole key, okay, from here, from begin to end. Okay, so copy and paste this key. So copy it and then paste it under key. So paste. All right, so that's the key. Certificate is the client certificate available in your CA. So I need to do sudo on the server. So I need to do sudo cat and then give it this client certificate. Okay, so we only need the certificates, no need to copy and paste the fingerprint. So copy and paste the certificate. Okay, so go to the client certificates, paste it here, and then we need to go to the CA. So the CA certificate, we need to copy and paste it. So do sudo cat. Okay, so that's the certificate authorities certificate. So go ahead and paste it here, and then we will see TLS script. So that's something um, we need to do. So copy the TLS script, the file that remember we generated. Uh, so do sudo cat to that file. Okay, so do this, copy, and then paste it here. Okay, so and then basically will result to the final result would look like this, something similar. I trimmed all the keys. um, so once that is done, we need to download. So this assume actually that you created the file on the server. So that's something another what I did. But if you created the file on the server, then you need to use this tool called sorry, secure copy. Alright, so if you run this whole file on the server and you copy the keys from there, then you're probably going to download that one into your client machine. Okay, but in my case, I did something else. So I created the key on my Mac OS, not on my VPN server. Okay, so I don't need to do this secure copy. But if you wanna do it, just copy and paste the commands, this command on the server, right? So once that is done, and by the way, you don't need to use Nano or any text editor on your Windows or in Mac. You could use any text editor to copy and paste the keys and generate the files. So once that is done, let's save this file. So it says Control O, write it, and then Control X. So we need to connect the client into our VPN server. So we downloaded the client. I assume that you picked one of these or something else. And then you need to feed this file, client01.openvpn, into that client program to make the connection. So let's see how that can be done. Alright, so I downloaded Tunnel Black and I'm gonna go ahead and start it. So on Mac again, you could use any other on Mac or Windows, you could use any other client and that you want. Okay, so this is it says there are no VPN, so I would say I have a configuration file. So it says you have to add it. So it will add it here to this area. So you go to VPN or add a VPN, add a VPN, okay, and it sends you back to the same. Okay, which is funny. Okay, so you go and add. Okay, so they like drag and drop. Okay, so go to the Open VPN client here and then drag it and drop it here. So only me, and then type your password. Okay, so now it's installed. Alright, so if you want to connect to that VPN server, I do connect with the name of the config file. So in my case, client 1. So we'll do connect. We'll see if it's going to make a connection or not. Okay, so if I see it is connected, so great. So our VPN server, now our client is connected to that VPN server. Okay, and if you want to look, if you want to make sure that you're really connected, all you need to do is just I don't know, search for what is my IP address on DuckDuckGo. So I'm using, so it tells me the actual IP address that this web server sees is this one, which is in Columbus, Ohio, United States, which is where I created the VPN server. Alright, so this is how we add that one to the client. Next, I need to restrict access to VPN instance to all of my VPN VM instances. Okay, so I want to restrict all the SSH access to only VPN, so no one can access my virtual machine instances on AWS unless they are coming from this um, public IP address, right? So let's see how that can be done. Right, so the final step is to restrict access to your VM instances to VPN only. So we need to log in into the cloud provider and then find the create a new VM and then find the option to limit access to your virtual private network or instances to a range of IP addresses, right? So what we need to do is we need to go to the dashboard. Okay, in my case I'm using AWS, so you can go ahead and do that in Azure, be the same terminologies or any other provider. So you launch an instance, you select an OS, so I'm gonna pick um, OS 7. So select, and then so I will create a new virtual machine and I will protect that one. So I'm probably gonna pick the cheapest one. So one CPU, so this is probably the cheapest if it's not the T3. Alright, so just gonna create it for a minute or so, just a few minutes, and then destroy it. So next, add storage, no storage, no tags. So this is where you need to configure your inbound traffic. Okay, so we want to restrict the inbound traffic to port 22, the SSH port, um, to only this IP. So I'm connected to the VPN server, so that's why I'm going to say only my IP, and my IP should reflect the the public IP address of this virtual machine that's running the VPN server. Alright, so restrict it to only this um, uh, this IP address, which is the IP address of the VPN server. Okay, 32 is the size of the subnet, so that should be right. So add this role. Uh, so um, so probably add role. Okay, no. So this is the role that will be added. So hit just review and launch. Alright, so it's going to be only to this one. So hit launch. So probably need to uh, use the key. So select an existing key. So probably I have one existing key, AWS key, that I just created for this lab. So launch instances. Okay. So view instance. So this is the new instance. Um, sorry, not this one. It's this one right here. So this is the public IP address. So in reality, in real world, you're gonna pick a static IP address for your VPN server. Okay, so you're probably going to buy a static IP address, so that way if you reboot the VPN server, you don't need to do all these configuration steps and hard-coded IP addresses. So just pick a static IP address, so you can that thing will remain unchanged to you. So I'm gonna copy this one, and I'm going to access it through SSH. So I will do SSH minus I, and then I will give it then the path to the private key. So I chose AWS-key. This is a private key, and then the user instruction here says the default user is CentOS. So CentOS at the public IP address here. Copy, right, and then hit enter. Okay, so it will ask me to confirm. Yes, confirm, and now I am on that um, server, right? So I'm accessing that instance. So this is because I'm connected to the VPN. So if I exit and disconnect from the VPN and try to do SSH, so now I'm disconnected to that VPN and try to do SSH, this is probably going to time out. Okay, so I will not be able to access the virtual machine instance because I'm not connected to the VPN network. Alright, so I'm getting operation timed out. So I wasn't able to connect to this instance because this was protected through VPN. So only the access was restricted to VPN only. All right, so that's it for this lab. Probably going to clean up your resources and delete the VM instance. You don't wanna get charged for these services, right? So I'm gonna stop these instances and then delete them because this was done only for demonstration purposes. All right, so that's it for this lab. Wow, that was a long one. Hope you learned how to create your own virtual private network server and protect access to your VM instances to VPN only. So that's all for this lab.